There we go. Get the mic up there. Alright, so for today we're going to be going over how to format your concept sheet. Kind of like a ref sheet, but not exactly. We'll be going over the different parts of the ref sheet. I've kind of squeezed a lot of things together on a single ref sheet, but a lot of the time you're going to be separating these out. I'll be going over each part in detail and describing, okay, well maybe this could have its own section on a different page, etc., etc. But just for clarity's sake, I've kind of put everything here up front so you guys can just look at it and know the difference between each part of the concept process. So we're going to start with our main concept over here on the left. This is probably going to be the pose and concept that you start with. This concept should show off the main features of the creature or character in question. It should show its face. It should have very simple rendering, but enough rendering to indicate the texture of the creature. Here you can see it's got glossy fur, glossy feathers, compared to its rather matte skin texture. And this is pretty stylized. If I was going for something more realistic, there would be a lot more rendering involved. But just for this concept's sake, it's fairly simple. It also shows off its personality, like a common pose that you would see it in, you know, holding up its hand, saying hi, kind of just sitting around. It shows off that posture, which is what I wanted to get across for the main concept. Now, if we move on to the turnarounds are not always T-pose. Sometimes they're just a creature in a different gesture, in a different pose, from a different angle. I actually prefer those because it shows off more of its movement, so your animators can look at it and kind of tell, okay, well, this is how it moves. But in this case, I just did the T-pose for simplicity's sake, and also to show off the length of its arms. Because in the main concept, you can't really tell how long its arms are, because normally it's going to be tucked up into its body when it's sitting like that. So just for the modeler's sake, we want to show them how long the arms actually are in proportion to its main body. So that's why the T-pose works in this case. If your T-pose is basically showing you the exact same thing that your main concept is showing you, then you need to pick something else. Then you need to pick a different pose where either you see it from a different view, like a top-down view or something. Like, you need to show more with your turnarounds than what is indicated in the main concept. That is the purpose of a turnaround, is to show off more of the body and clarify how it moves, how it works. That is the purpose of a turnaround. If you're not doing that, if you're repeating the same pose, the same angle over and over and over again, you're not accomplishing your goal, you're spinning your wheels, and you should think about choosing a different pose for the creature. So here it's all about showing off the length of the arms, how far they spread from the body. And here, if you have any detail on the back of your creature, go ahead and indicate this in the turnaround. Now these are not rendered, they're not super textured or anything. One, because rendering something out on the same page as your main concept is going to compete compositionally for attention. Composing your ref sheets is just as important as rendering out the specific bits. Your execution is just as important as your composition. So here you want to make sure that this thing is going to be the center of attention. It's got the highest contrast in the page, it's rendered, it's the biggest thing on the page, so this is obviously the main thing. These guys are not rendered. It is important to show color here, just so it's clear where things are oriented. In some cases you can desaturate them and it'll be fine, but you do not want to render these out. If you find yourself that you need to render something out to clarify it, just draw it in a different angle and do it that way, if you're going to put these on the same page as your main concept. Now, another thing about turnarounds is that usually I will have this main concept and just have turnarounds here, or just have color iterations. I don't usually like putting callouts and stuff on the same page as the main concept. I'll have a whole page just dedicated to specific callouts. But in this case, I've had the turnarounds and the callouts all together. And this is how you can make them work. You want to kind of divide them into their own section. So you don't want a bunch of callouts spilling out into over here. Like the callouts should be in their own little blob, main concept its own little blob, and their turnarounds their own little blob. And again, for turnarounds, make sure you're clarifying something from every angle. So for the tail, you can't really tell how the feathers are oriented if they're like going ventrically, where it's like one feather on top, one feather in the middle, one feather on the bottom, or if it's spread out laterally. In this case, the feathers are lateral, so I needed to clarify that with the top view of the tail. Like, you want to think about as if you were a modeler. This is another reason why 3D is so important for you guys to learn, is you need to understand what a modeler is thinking when they look at a concept. What is important for them to know. In this case, they need to know what the heck is going on with the tail, because it's not immediately obvious in the main concept. And it wouldn't be immediately obvious unless you had been looking at it from top down, because of how thin the feathers are. So this is to help your modeler. And let's move on to the concepts here, or the callouts. Now, callouts are meant to clarify the structure and movement and function of key expressive features. These are features that are going to be very prominent in the creature, whether it's going to be on its face, or in my creature, it's the hands. The hands are the most important thing for the creature because they're going to be the main thing that it uses to express itself. It has a very stiff face, it has a very bird-like face. It's not going to have eyes or eyebrows that are going to be very like bouncy or stretchy. So all of its expression is going to be in its hands. So I needed to do callouts of its hands. If you had a different creature where all of its expression is going to come through its lip, you know, like when monkeys flip their lips up to express rage or to communicate things to each other, that's an important callout. That's something that you will need to do callouts of in the future. Now, I don't expect these callouts for your assignment on Wednesday. This is just going over an overall ref sheet of what you would be doing. But let's say you want to add this to your portfolio in the future. I highly recommend that you do a page of callouts just for those key features. If I had more time, I would have done more on the face. I would have done more on the feathers, like different expressions with just the feathers on its head. But for me, I wanted to focus on the hands primarily. And another thing about callouts is that these provide you a good opportunity to show scale of the creature without having to put it in a really artificial lineup. I noticed a lot of you are doing the lineup thing to show scale between concepts, but really the most important thing is to have the creature interact with an object in the world as part of one of your callouts. Usually something intimate that we're familiar with handling, especially if it's a smaller object or a smaller creature. You want to give them something that is recognizable, that we're all used to handling ourselves, so we can immediately have an idea of what the scale is. This is a cherry. I assume that everyone has handled a cherry before in their life. At least seen one being handled in person. So you have an idea of scale just looking at the comparison of this cherry to this creature's hands. You have an idea of how big this creature is without having to put it in a lineup. And you can reinforce that by putting like other small creatures next to it, like ants. Because this is a small creature. Obviously, if I put an elephant's foot next to it, it wouldn't be such a great idea of scale because elephant's feet are, 1, unfamiliar, 2, so big that it would probably take up the whole page. So use something that's intimate, that's familiar to us, that's familiar in the real world sense, and then have your creature interact with it. And that is a good way to insert scale without having to take up a whole page for a lineup. And here, obviously, you want to make sure if there's anything special about your creature, like if its tongue sticks out funny, like in this case, you want to show it actually, sticking out, and then kind of indicate how it would be at rest within the body, because you never know, the modeler might need to model this out, or he might need to know how this works inside before he attaches the tongue to the beak. The same with animators, they need to know how it rests in the beak, so if they need to animate an at-rest animation where it comes back inside its mouth, they know how it's going to come back. That's why it's important to do these structural sketches here. I think that's about it. For your assignment on Wednesday, all I want are the turnarounds. You don't have to do a main concept like this, you don't have to render it out. All I want is this section here at the bottom. But in the future, if you do want to do portfolio stuff, you need to do callouts, and you will need to do a main concept like this, showing off its personality, if it's not already indicated in the turnaround. Another thing for Wednesday is if you have a feature of your creature that's kind of odd or kind of obscured by your turnaround in question, then go ahead and do a top view orthographic type of thing just to clarify those things. It won't be counted against you necessarily, but if there is a feature of your animal that is being obscured and you didn't clarify it, that will count against you. But yeah, so just this section, this is dependent on your creature's design, your tail if you have a tail. But yeah, just worry about this turnaround section for now. I'll be putting up the PSD on the drive so you can check it out. And yeah, that's about it.